It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Engineered weather and temperature whiplash. This January, just like last January, a possible snow event is scheduled for Florida, while other regions of the U.S. and the world bake in record winter warmth. Reminder, the never-before-recorded New Orleans blizzard and Gulf Coast Florida blizzards happened on January 21st of 2025. Some of the most aggressive chemical ice nucleation climate engineering ever, the day after the official changing of the guard. Though the weather warfare has been expanded for over 80 years all over the world, under every administration during that span of time. Fast forward to now, from AOL.com, snow in Florida? ? Arctic blast to stun the South. From that report, a coastal storm will deliver snow to part of the southeastern United States on Sunday, January 18th, before eyeing the mid-Atlantic coast and New England on Sunday night. Snow is expected to begin in the Florida Panhandle and southern Georgia Saturday night. They should say snow, the chemical kind, is scheduled for those locations. The 7 to 10 day global departure from normal surface temperature forecast shows during this same span of time and beyond, Arctic meltdown, off the chart above normal temperatures. Again, while it's going to be snowing in Florida. For those that don't know what chemical ice nucleation for weather modification is, these are endothermic reacting elements. These are patented processes that are seeded into cloud moisture that chemically nucleate ice, create a cold, dense layer of air that sinks to the surface. Various forms of frozen material often come with it depending on the conditions and the temperature of the atmospheric moisture. We typically see an ice storm in the transition zone between the flows of above freezing moisture and the chemical cool downs. We also see, again, baseball, softball size hail. Search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn much more about this core component of climate engineering that for some reason geoengineeringwatch.org is the only online source willing to admit to, while other sources that claim to be fighting climate engineering actually simultaneously claim that the engineered cool downs are just a sign of a coming ice age or global cooling, exactly the narratives the climate engineers want. When will this change? Why is geoengineeringwatch.org the only source that's trying to expose this core component of climate engineering? Again, numerous forms of historically unnatural frozen shapes and sizes falling from the skies, including constant baseball and softball size hail, and about all those traffic accidents, all those pileups. Surfactants are also a part of this mix. Surfactants are used to keep particles from coagulating together. Surfactants are what makes soap slippery. So is it any wonder that those that thought they knew how to drive on snow now don't? Here's another geoengineeringwatch.org short video report to search for a better understanding of how the climate engineers are completely disrupting the entire system. Geoengineering is creating freeze-fry extremes. Moving on from theconversation.com, rain 1 minute, heat the next. How climate whiplash drives unpredictable fire weather. First, let's stop there for a moment. From theconversation.com or any other source, online or matrix media, any discussion of climate, anything from any perspective is not legitimate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering elephant in the equation. It's staggering that we live on a planet with populations of so-called experts that lack the courage to tell the truth because they're protecting their paychecks and pensions, or there's those that are so completely programmed by the power structure, they don't even know what the truth is. They know what they were told the truth is, when in fact it's anything but. The Conversation.com report then goes on to ask, why is there so much dry lightning? ? They then say, there is emerging evidence that as energy in the atmosphere increases globally, there is more lightning. It's a diagnostic sign of a hotter and more unstable climate. Is the climate hotter and more unstable? Absolutely. But what else is fueling that lightning? When you fill the atmosphere with electrically conductive particulate matter that creates unimaginable static energy buildup, you are going to have more dry lightning. And the same particulate matter, in many instances, depending on the size of particle they're dispersing, creates too many condensation nuclei, which prohibits the droplets from combining into a big enough drop to fall as rain, so it migrates the moisture elsewhere. So we have far more dry lightning. What a surprise. AccuWeather, 60s to snowflakes, question mark, buckle up, Indiana. Winter's whiplash is here. No, it's not winter's whiplash. It's climate engineering, aka weather warfare, chemical, ice nucleation, winter whiplash. Another from AccuWeather, same title, weather whiplash, gusty winds, weekend warmth, then Arctic blast. The winds are part of the cool down. Climate engineering with pressure zone manipulation can and does create extreme surface zonal winds, which we see constantly now. That's part of the atmospheric snow blowing machine. That's in fact exactly what they're doing, especially around the Great Lakes region. They're creating zonal flows of wind over the record warm Great Lakes, picking up some of the moisture, chemically nucleating it, piling it up in select locations like Erie, Pennsylvania, Buffalo, New York, pumping out sensationalized headlines and making the public believe that it's so cold and wintry all over when in fact it's not the case, and they're simply skewing public perception and record keeping. I'll get to that shortly. Another from AccuWeather, plunging temperatures, snow, chances signal return of typical January winter weather to eastern U.S. So on the previous headline, when they acknowledge that we're going from warmth to Arctic blast, and now we have another headline that states we're going back to a typical January winter, there's nothing typical about anything weather-wise anywhere. And those who say it's always been this way, that's typically a form of denial from those who don't want to face the truth no matter what they see. If the sky was on fire, they'd say, oh, it's always been that way. Yeah, don't you remember? No, I don't. More from the AccuWeather headline I mentioned a moment ago. Following an unusually warm pattern over the last week or so, residents across the East will observe a return to winter weather this week. Summary. As we head further into January, the weather terrorists continue to schedule waves of chemical ice nucleation cooldowns for much of the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, by far the most populated states in the U.S., and again, as I've stated many times in this broadcast, the most anomalously less warm region in the entire world. It's less than 1% of the global surface area, but it's the most anomalously less warm region in the world for the last 14 years now, since 2012, while the western U.S. will continue to bake in high temperature records, winter high temperature records. The temperatures and lack of humidity in my wilderness location in Northern California is far beyond alarming. After dark in mid-January, temperatures still pushing 70 degrees in the forests of Northern California on the east side of Lake Shasta. Again, middle of winter, 70 degrees after dark. We had temperatures in summer that were pushing 100 at 1 o'clock in the morning. What does it take to wake people up? And just because they engineer a quick toxic flash cool down doesn't make everything all better again. And people that don't know what's going on around the world, please take a look, because the planet's imploding by the day. So-called solar radiation management operations are raging in skies all over the world. Whatever the weather may be in a specific region on a specific day, various forms of climate engineering, aka weather, chemical, and biological warfare operations, are filling our skies with a plethora of toxic nanoparticle pollution, all of which settles down through our breathable air column. And no, it isn't just jet exhaust that so often completely covers entire horizons with a filthy, dingy, discolored canopy, often interwoven with the striping of recent sprayed dispersions. And those that still refuse to believe this reality, and they refuse to believe their lying eyes and mountains of data, those are the same ones that believe Building 7 on 9/11, 47-story steel structure high-rise that fell down from nothing in 7 seconds in its own footprint. Those are the ones that still believe the official narrative that that happened because some furniture was burning on the first and second story. Really? So when someone throws, again, a cigarette butt into a trash can that might still be lit, we should sprint for the exits if we're in a high-rise because it could collapse at free fall speed. Mind-numbing. What will it take for more to use their God-given sense of logic and reason? Undisclosed solar radiation management operations are absolutely occurring and have been and escalating in scope and scale for the last 80 plus years, and all of us, no exceptions, are inhaling what they are spraying. With that in mind, this new headline from sfgate.com, air alert for San Francisco Bay Area despite no wildfire smoke. For the record, all of our air is polluted to some degree all the time. And official air quality testing looks for 10 micron particles, which is a boulder compared to the far more toxic nanoparticles that are going completely under the radar. Why? Because they're not even looking for them, let alone disclosing them. At best, you have a few stations looking for PM 2.5, which is much more toxic than PM 10, but far less toxic than the nanoparticle pollution that is a direct result of climate engineering operations. That is the primary element. 40 to 60 million tons sprayed into our skies annually. Every breath we take is toxic. For over 2 decades, I've desperately tried to sound the alarm that when the unfolding and accelerating global climate and ecological collapse reached a critical crossroad, and we are there, controller desperation would go exponential. Again, that time is now, and much worse is coming. Here's a few examples, harbingers of global ecological collapse, resource depletion, subsequent societal collapse, and total controller desperation. The events in Venezuela, the events in Minnesota, the looming threat of still more sovereign nation seizures and the fracturing of NATO from those seizures by force for resource acquisition. How much good will that do anybody on a dead planet, which we are hurtling toward? Skyrocketing commodity prices. Can't eat those shiny coins. Hyperinflated stock markets. House of cards ready to collapse. Imploding global crop production. Crashing fisheries around the globe. And for the record, the fish that are caught, whether it's from the ocean or freshwater bodies, is all toxic. All of it. On freshwater fish in the U.S., peer-reviewed study, 500 locations, every single fish, wild-caught fish, toxic. No exceptions. Plankton populations also crashing, 90% in the Atlantic, other oceans not far behind. Plankton, the primary oxygen producer on the planet. It is the foundational pillar for life on Earth. Crashing insect populations down 80 to 90% globally. That's terrestrial and aquatic. Crashing wildlife populations down 75% in the last 40 years alone from an already depleted population. How long does anyone think this can continue? The list goes on and on. How much have toxic global weather warfare operations further fueled collapse on every single front? How many countries have been subjected to relentless weather warfare assaults, decades long in some cases, cutting off rainfall to further destabilize already unraveling societies? On that note, from the UK Guardian, how day zero water shortages in Iran are fueling protests. From the report, supply failures are a dramatic example of the ways in which climate collapse is threatening basic human needs. Let's add climate engineering to that equation. Again, no legitimate discussion about climate anything without first and foremost dealing with climate engineering, which is far more effective, by the way, at cutting off rain than augmenting it. The report then states, and with it, political stability. When you cut off the flow of water, you destabilize food production, you destabilize populations. Let's remember Lyndon Johnson in 1962, start of every single weekly Global Alert News broadcast, him ranting like a maniac, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. And this is an example of that. Report then says, gripped by a terrible drought, now entering its 6th year, it's actually its 40th year, Iran's cities are on the brink of what is meteorologically called water day zero, the boundary beyond which supply systems no longer function. Tehran, home to 10 million people, has been threatened with the most drastic measure of all, evacuation. How do we evacuate 10 million people to other drought-stricken regions? Again, this country, in the case of this country, their leaders on the floor of the UN, stating for decades, NATO is cutting off their precipitation. So much more to the stories we are fed on matrix media that leave out all these kinds of details, don't they? Not condoning that government, not condoning any other culture, any culture for that matter. I'm simply stating facts. Facts which are needed to come to a correct conclusion, not matrix media propaganda. And Fox is the worst of all, by the way. Fox Media is nothing but nonstop power structure propaganda, and the other channels aren't far behind. But to be the top of that heap, that's truly an accomplishment. The cascading collapse of countries all over the world is well underway and picking up momentum by the day. Here's a question. Since we know that the occupants of the White House, regardless of their political stripe, aren't actually the ones in control, and since history makes crystal clear that the money-printing secret banker societies that are the true manipulators of the matrix plan years, decades, even further in advance. What current crises are connected to previous controller orchestration? Preparations for what is now. With all that in mind, more questions. First, consider the possibility that the former power structure puppet occupant of the White House, Biden, was instructed by those that are actually in control, aka, again, the money printers, to leave the borders open and thus allow maximum numbers of immigrants and refugees to enter the U.S. illegally and be bussed everywhere. By doing so, they would effectively sow the seeds and set the stage for what is now unfolding. Was it all part of a larger, long-term plan? Again, the Biden administration, by leaving the borders open and allowing illegal immigrants to be bussed all over the country in order to facilitate future objectives and agendas. Again, Biden was a puppet, as were all administrations going all the way back to JFK. The current administration, also the puppets of those that rule from the shadows, have been given the pretext that the controllers wanted to fund, assemble, and deploy the power structure personal army with at least the initial support of large segments of the population. The fomenting and fueling of societal polarization, fear, and chaos has always been a core controller strategy for populations they intend to control and subdue. And when the food shelves begin to empty out, subduing populations is exactly what they will try to do with every tool at their disposal, with climate engineering, aka weather, chemical, and biological warfare, at the top of the list. Same core of control behind all of it. The official narrative of what is taking place in Minnesota and why is no more credible than the official narrative of what took place on 9/11 or in Iraq or Afghanistan or in the more recent ongoing killing fields of the Middle East. On that note, how was the stage set for what has taken place there? Consider this headline from the Times of Israel, October 8th, 2023. Quote, "For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces." Hamas was funded through Qatar since 2006 by Netanyahu. Imagine that. Please don't believe me. Do your own research. Again, the manipulators of the Matrix plan decades in advance or more. Fomenting and fueling societal unrest is their stock and trade, not just in other nations, but right here at home. Divide and conquer. It has always been the strategy of the kleptocrat predator controllers. Climate engineering operations are the crown jewel weapon of the controllers, the weapon with which they can and have been and continue to bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they were under assault. Just blame nature. And of course, there are the chemical and biological dangers of the same operations. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, The End of the World as We Know It, broadcast brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Quick footnote, for those that truly want to help sound the alarm while we still have time to do so, very effective climate engineering awareness-raising materials are available on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org. Full-color printed materials which we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We also have Geoengineering Watch shirts. Restock sizes, new colors. These are great conversation starters, and starting a conversation is the first and most important step in waking someone up to what they didn't know was going on right above their heads. Moving on. Definition. Kleptocrat controller. Predator kleptocrat controller refers to a corrupt political leader, a kleptocrat, who systematically uses state power to steal national wealth for personal enrichment, controlling resources and institutions to facilitate this plunder, often hiding assets abroad through complex networks and suppressing opposition to maintain control and wealth. The term highlights how rulers become essentially controllers or thieves of their nation's treasury, turning governance into a criminal enterprise for personal gain, a practice seen in various countries and involving international finance to launder money. Various countries? All governments are corrupt. It's a matter of size and scale. Before covering the following headline, again, please remember and consider that all occupants of the White House are deeply beholden to those that rule from the shadows. They are used to polarize, divide, and distract populations from the oncoming train of total biological collapse and the noose of total control that's being very quickly tightened around our collective necks. If power structure puppets, and this goes all the way to the top, if they step out of line, they will meet the same fate as JFK. Though there are courageous exceptions, and they know who they are, the majority know how long their leash is. They are ultimately obedient order followers of those who pull the strings. With that in mind, from the UK Daily Mail, GOP caves to Trump in dramatic U-turn, granting him unchecked war powers. What a surprise. How many know that ICE funding is more than the full military funding of most countries? Again, remember and consider the over 2 billion rounds of hollow point bullets purchased by U.S. agencies like Homeland Security in 2012. Again, I ask, what do you think all that ammunition was for as collapse unfolds and accelerates? Here's a reminder report from the New York Times. I made mention of it in last week's broadcast. It's important. It needs to be remembered and considered. Here's the headline. Trump lays out a vision of power restrained only by, quote, my own morality. He further stated, quote, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me, end quote. Statements like that should trigger deep alarms. But again, the true seats of power lie in the shadows, the money printers. He who controls the weather controls the world. On that note, from MSN, the $45 trillion climate fix nobody wants to admit is real. From that report, global warming is not slowing down, even after decades of pledges, protest, and diplomatic theater. Also, 8 decades of climate engineering. How's that going so far? Making a bad situation far worse, not better. It's weather warfare. Sorry, I digress. The report continues. The uncomfortable reality behind the headline figure of $45 trillion is that stabilizing the climate now looks less like a one-time investment and more like a permanent restructuring of the global economy. The $45 trillion climate fix is not a silver bullet, but rather shorthand for a vast, politically fraught transfer of wealth and power that few leaders want to describe honestly. The phrase $45 trillion climate fix captures a brutal arithmetic. The report then states, for elected leaders admitting that the climate fix carries a $45 trillion price tag, which again is a meaningless number, the current climate engineering Manhattan project is likely far more costly than that, printed money from thin air until the total card house collapses. They say the $45 trillion price tag is a political nightmare. Voters hear trillions and think of higher taxes, higher energy prices, or cuts to other services, not of avoided losses decades from now. That's why so much climate rhetoric leans on vague promises of green growth and win-win solutions. All of this is a lie, all of it. And when people say, again, it's the economy stupid, no, it's the climate stupid. It's the environment stupid, without which we're done, gone, game over. How many don't see that at this point, especially those living in urban areas that aren't seeing what I see living in the middle of the wilderness that's virtually imploding around me? A formerly thriving wilderness 20 years ago is now deathly silent, dead trees everywhere, no sounds, no birds, no insects. We're hearing this from all over the globe. How long can this possibly continue? And you can't put a price tag on it. You can't put a price tag on a planet that no longer supports life. Question, how many types of toxic nanoparticles are used in the constant chemical ice nucleation climate engineering operations, contaminating every single breath we take, every bite of food, every drink of water? Keep that in mind. Some puzzle pieces. First, from the Weather Channel, snow, lake effect, and freeze-ups to accompany colder air into next week. Again, they're just chemically nucleating whatever moisture they can to create these scenarios and these headlines. The report says a parade of storms from Canada will bring rounds of snow, lake effect, and reinforcing cold from the Midwest to the Northeast early into next week with slick roads. Went over that earlier, didn't I? Quick freeze-ups, chemical flash freeze kind. And they say repeated surges of cold air will produce rounds of lake effect snow and create the risk of rapid freeze-ups. This is the same I mentioned earlier, creating pressure zone manipulation, surface zonal flows of wind, what amounts to an atmospheric snow-blowing machine to pile up snow on isolated locations, sensationalize the headlines, and convince the population that, yeah, sure, it's record high temperatures day after day in your part of the world, but hey, it's cold somewhere, so it must be okay. Every form an application of climate engineering is further contaminating our air on top of industrialized pollution in countless forms. With that in mind, from Earth.com, people inhale very high levels of microplastics simply by breathing city air. No, it's not just city air. It's air, period. It doesn't matter where you're at. They're spraying prolifically over the polar regions. There's no place to hide from this fallout. Next headline from ScienceDaily.com. This is an ongoing worsening story. A shocking amount of plastic is floating in city air. Again, no, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. But the report says plastic pollution is not just in oceans and soil. Scientists have now found enormous amounts of plastic floating through urban air, far exceeding earlier estimates. Researchers have discovered that city air contains far more microplastics and nanoplastics than previously believed. The study marks the first time nanoplastics as small as 200 nanometers have been detected with complex environmental samples. Way worse than we thought. How many times on how many issues of collapse do we hear this from? Same as I've been warning about for over 2 decades. It's far worse than anything we're being told, and now they're starting to tell the truth, not because they want to, but because they can no longer hide it. Let's add this from the UK Independent. Scientists detect hidden plastic clouds hovering over Chinese cities. What in the world is that about? I wonder. Previous studies have underestimated the amount of plastic in the atmosphere, scientists say. Yet again, underestimated. Didn't know. Way worse than we thought. The report says these tiny particles have now been detected in soils, life forms, even in the atmosphere, in all parts of the world, including the Arctic and Antarctic. Where did I hear that before? A growing body of studies implicates them in health conditions ranging from hormonal disruption, cancer, heart ailments, impaired reproduction, as well as neurological damage. Questions remain, they say, including how many of these tiny plastic particles exist and where they come from. I wonder. Yes, we have decomposing plastics all over the planet. I'm not denying that. But some of the particles that geoengineeringwatch.org found in our atmospheric testing and tested at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York were manufactured particles. That's not simple decomposition. Polymers in geoengineering patents, primary element, along with a plethora of toxic metals. Scientists found that these tiny plastic particles are small enough to remain suspended for long periods and can even act as triggers of cloud formation. Yes, that's their purpose. Do these so-called experts have a shred of honor, or are they criminally ignorant of the very field in which we're told they're experts? It's one or the other. They then say that, quote, there are potential implications for climate, ecosystems, and human health. Potential implications. That, again, is like stating if you swan dive from the roof of a 100-story building and you use the pavement to break your fall, there could be some implications to that. But the current occupants of the White House, they're going to make America healthy again, right? Not so much. From Vox.com, Trump's EPA is setting the value of human health to zero. From the report, quote, the Environmental Protection Agency is taking a major step toward changing its policies to favor polluters over people. It's going to stop tallying the dollar value of lives saved and hospital visits avoided by air pollution regulations. In other words, it's going to sweep all of it under the rug. The agency will consider the effects of regulations without attaching a price tag to human life. Question, what about all other forms of life? The report then says the change is part of a broader pattern of the EPA and across federal government. Under the second Trump administration, the EPA has already closed its Office of Research and Development, which was meant to provide scientific basis for environmental regulations like tracking the effects of toxic chemicals on the human body. Who needs that information? Let's just keep making chemicals and dumping them everywhere and pretend it isn't happening. Make America healthy again. Right. Let's take the red food coloring out of Fruit Loops while we pollute the entire planet. The report then says the EPA is being pressured from the White House to cut regulation and craft policies benefiting politically favored industries. The ulterior motive is to mask the true impact of particulate matter exposure, end quote from the report. Question, is it even remotely reasonable to believe that the criminal cabal masquerading as our government is going to do anything but continue to ramp up the global contaminating climate engineering weather warfare assault, which is exactly what's occurring? Next, from the New York Times and many other sources, EPA to stop considering lives saved when setting rules on air pollution. Second report, same theme. From the report, long-term exposure to atmospheric pollutants is linked to asthma, heart and lung disease, and premature death. It's a long list, much longer than that. They say even moderate exposure to PM 2.5 can damage the lungs as much as smoking. It's way worse because we're talking about nanoparticles, which they're still not really looking for or disclosing, only in selective scenarios. The rest goes under the radar. Is so-called solar radiation management actually cooling the planet, as we were told it would? Not so much. Short-term toxic cooldowns at the price of an even worsened overall meltdown. From Bloomberg, scientists confirmed 2025 was the third hottest year, trailing 2024 and 2023. That is an absolute blatant lie. This is statistical falsification and data skewing from chemical ice nucleation flash surface cooldowns, which completely skews the data. And when they cool down a region, they'll take 10 times more cold temperature readings than they do when there's a record warm scenario. Every year warmer than the last. All we're seeing now, again, massive amounts of chemical ice nucleation that temporarily and toxically cools the surface, and then they skew the data on top of that. The planet's in total meltdown. From Euronews.com, 2025, third hottest year. Why is this decade breaking records? Question mark. What a moronic question. We thrashed the planet in the geologic blink of an eye, industrialized, militarized, everything, with climate engineering being at the top of the list, and it's all the above. Too many people blaming everything on climate engineering as if the planet's totally immune to all the other forms of abuse we inflict on it. That's not credible to take that position. It's not reasonable. It's not rational. It's an all-the-above equation. If we can stop climate engineering, we can address the other forms of damage to the planet. But it is an all-the-above equation. And if you really want to help the climate engineering cause, if the subject of climate comes up, again, this narrative, how can we have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective, without dealing with climate engineering first? Don't alienate the people that care about the environment and that rightfully know we've damaged it in countless forms. Don't alienate them by ranting global warming hoax, global cooling, coming ice age. All of those blatantly, ridiculously false narratives only alienate half the people we need in this battle. That's not helping this cause. From InsideClimateNews.com, new climate report shows unprecedented run of global heat. Data from multiple international agencies shows the reality of a rapidly warming planet. It's in total meltdown. Colorado River watershed drying up quickly. The little bit of snow that is falling in the Colorado River head area, the drainage area, is going to sublimate much of it, which means there's not going to be nearly as much runoff of what little is there. Trouble's coming fast. From DistilledEarth.com, data centers are pushing Arizona's grid to a breaking point. What a great idea. Let's build the water-guzzling data centers where there's soon going to be no water. What a great idea. Power demand is rising faster in Arizona than almost anywhere else in the country. That's going to meet a bad end soon. Southwest drought, California drought. Oh, it's all gone, they say. All gone. Everything's fine now. Never mind the dead forest and lack of wildlife and the fact that in my location, it's literally hundreds of inches short in the last 15 years. That doesn't just go away just because they flood a few areas. And when we get 10 inches in about 12 hours, which happened here several weeks ago, that doesn't cure a drought. It simply washes soil and trees and everything else into the dam. In the case of where I live, it doesn't cure a drought. It's statistical falsification across the board on everything. Kind of like safe and effective, right? How true is that? Drought wars. From the times of Israel, the Middle East's next war will be over water. While pundits remain hypnotized by manifestos, missiles, and terrorist groups, the region's real balance of power is being rewritten quietly, mechanically, and without drama behind concrete dams, desiccated riverbeds, and rationed taps. This is not an environmental story. It is a story about power, coercion, and survival. Exactly. It's weather warfare. That's the primary problem because it must rain more on a rapidly warming planet, not less. Atmosphere holds 7% of moisture for every degree C of warming. We're likely past 3.5 C now. That's with unfiltered data, not 1.5, 3.5. That's close to 6.5 degrees, something in that range. Again, people have no idea. The vast majority have no idea how grave and immediate our collective situation is. From BBC, Himalayas bare and rocky after reduced winter snowfall, scientists warn. They say much less winter snow is falling in the Himalayas. Think about that. While they're pushing snowstorms in Florida, again, leaving the mountains bare and rocky in many places of the region. Rising temperatures also means that what little snow falls melts very quickly. There's also the sublimation factor, which I mentioned. And some lower elevation areas are also seeing more rain and less snow. Many areas, that is the case. Studies have also shown there is now what is known as snow drought during the winter in many parts of the Himalayan region. Yes, there is. And just move to Florida if you want snow, or New Orleans, the chemical kind. From the Weather Channel, are hurricanes too warm to freeze? Question mark. Hard hailstones aren't common, they say, in hurricanes, but ice is increasingly thought to be at least somewhat common in a different form, grapple. This is some of the many forms of chemical nucleation. And yes, they dump the same materials into cyclones as well, trying to do whatever they can to temporarily and toxically cool down surface temperatures. They say grapple is a softer form of hail that is somewhat a weird cousin of sleet. Several Hurricane Hunter flights have had to be stopped mid-flight because the planes get impacted by grapple storms as the scientists investigate hurricanes and the climate engineers fly above, dumping chemical nucleating elements into the same storm. Another headline, same theme. Other countries obviously neck-deep in climate engineering as well. From the India Tribune, snow apocalypse hits Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, shatters 146-year-old record. This is simply every single country using the same types of operations. There's intergovernmental cooperation. We know that. We have 800-page U.S. Senate documents, important sections highlighted at geoengineeringwatch.org, that specifically state this document goes back to 1978. The intergovernmental cooperation between otherwise adversarial nations because of the cross-border ramifications of climate engineering. They are all colluding and cooperating behind the scenes, same as they did with CV19. And again, goes back to the same core of control, the money printers. Elected officials mean nothing. They are not the ones ultimately in control. Chemical winter weather warfare, with countries around the world actively or passively participating, with the exception of Iran. We know that because they were in the floor of the UN stating so, not participating. They're the victim of. But this is what goes on behind closed doors at climate conferences, like the COP climate conferences. Pretending they're going to change business as usual while behind closed doors, they're forcing countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering assault. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 545. I've never missed a week, and yes, I'm tired, but no, I will not leave my post. January 17th, 2026. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering, and we are the only organization that's done any of the type of testing we've done. Global Alert News is aired on a number of AM and FM stations around the country. If any radio station near you is willing to air the GAN broadcast in order to inform their listeners of what Matrix Media won't mention, have them contact us at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. We will grant them access to our weekly broadcast for free. Of course, recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming. This is the best A to Z on this issue, period. Fully exposes climate engineering atrocities, now well over 26 million views on YouTube. Best way to share, circulate the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a far wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, again, start a conversation. Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. High quality, extremely high quality, printed materials, full color, shocking images, pictures worth 1,000 words, satellite images, federal gag order on all nations, weathermen, National Weather Service, and NOAA. There's so much there. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies to go with our Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos are on our homepage. These are great conversation starters. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers. All of these are effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. We must reach a critical mass of awareness. It's the only way to stop what's happening in our skies, so that our military brothers and sisters that are being told they're doing something benevolent, something for the greater good, couldn't be further from the truth. We need to wake them up. They're literally participating in their own demise. Only by awakening our military brothers and sisters do we have a chance of stopping these operations. And to all those that, regardless of their personal circumstances and situations, are doing their best to sound the alarm on what's taking place in our skies, we march together in this battle. It is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. Moving on from extremetemps.com, more meltdown, historic heat wave in Asia, record heat from Middle East to Japan. Yes, a January heat wave in the northern hemisphere. From the UK Guardian, more than 500 structures destroyed in Victoria's bushfires as 12 major blazes continue to burn. Major bushfires, forest fires, are active across Victoria, many of which are expected to burn for days, likely much longer. What does this have to do with geoengineering? Everything. Everything. Please search the engineering wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. And the source of ignition is a separate subject completely. What is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? That's climate engineering. And please search Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, one of our most important reports. These are very key aspects of understanding this issue in more depth. From Vinjoy.com, nothing left. Bushfires tear through Victoria's wine regions. From the UK Guardian, flying foxes die in the thousands in worst mass mortality event since Australia's Black Summer of a few years ago. It's only getting worse overall. Thousands of flying foxes have perished in the heat wave that scorches southeast Australia. This is so sickening and sad to look at these poor creatures literally being baked out of the trees. In the meantime, though, in Florida, you can go there for a snowstorm where the lizards are falling out of the trees because they're freezing to death. That's called a country with the biggest military in the world and the most geoengineering jets in the world by far, 3 times more, by the way, aerial tankers, than all other militaries in the world combined. I wonder who's doing the most geoengineering on planet Earth. In the same part of the world, at the same time, this from the UK Guardian, we've lost everything. You can see caravans floating away. Flash flooding hits Victoria's Great Ocean Road. Hallmark of climate engineering, drought, deluge scenarios. Keep that in mind. Another from extremetemps.com, South America heat waves. Harsh heat in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, temperatures 104 degrees. And we have more heat waves sweeping Chile, Argentina, Patagonia, where wildfires, again, raging in huge areas. From the energymix.com, after 20 years, a deal to protect Amazon forest is falling apart. It's being ripped apart. The power structure is mind-numbingly desperate because they know collapse is close. It's imminent. There's no stopping it, but we can change the flavor of it, and we may yet salvage some of the planet's life support systems, but that effort will take all of us. From the UK Guardian, the world is losing its forests to wildfires. They're also dying by the day because the rain, when it does come, is toxic. It's killing soil microbiome, it's killing root systems, it's killing trees. The report says wildfires now destroy twice as much tree cover per year as 2 decades ago. A crisis fueled by climate change. Single greatest factor fueling the fires is climate engineering. And when you hear somebody say the forests are burning because we're not cutting down enough trees, that is patently false. And I do know trees and I know forests. My experience there is long. Back to my childhood, my father was an arborist. I participated in multiple cost-share habitat restoration operations in the forests of Northern California, working with federal agencies. I ran every one of those projects. I've been off-grid for 25 years. Search the Into the Wild section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for first-hand frontline reports of just how fast the forests are dying. Let's add this from MirageNews.com. Wildfires transform safe soil minerals into toxins. How about that? People think the forest is going to magically grow back after it's being scorched in hydrophobic soils. Nothing is growing back in places. In fact, even where forests haven't burned, the growth rate of newly planted saplings in my area, 0. Nothing makes it past the first year. People have no idea how grave and immediate our situation is. ExtremeTemps.com, extraordinary warmth, historic event, one of the most extreme in North America's history, kicks off. They say absolutely mind-blowing temperatures in the 50s. These are nighttime temperatures in Dakotas, Montana, parts of Canada, in the 50s. That's typical of June, not January. Same in Northern California. From ctvnews.ca, record heat to continue in southern Alberta, Canada. From ScienceDaily.com, a 3,000-year high. Alaska's Arctic is entering dangerous new fire era. They're saying more fires than any time in the last 3,000 years. It's far worse than that. Let's keep going. California, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico just experienced their hottest December in recorded history. And it's not just the warmest in history. High temperature records are being obliterated. From MSN, California just shattered a monthly temperature record. That figure may be surprising, the report says, especially the residents in the Bay Area and Central Valley that endured their coldest stretch of early December days in decades. They're talking about the freak fog that wouldn't go away, the toxic, atmospheric, manipulated, ice-nucleated fog. And outside that, record warm temperatures. And what happens when we have record warm temperatures for so long? And insects like mosquitoes, perhaps the GMO type from Mr. Bill Gates or others, when they can continue to proliferate, we have headlines like this. From frontiers.org, mosquitoes' thirst for human blood has increased as biodiversity loss worsens. They have nothing else to bite but humans. And what sorts of engineered pathogens might these flying hypodermic needles be spreading amongst us? Side note from surfer.com, also related to the warming temperatures, shark attacks reach record-breaking highs in California because there's no seals to eat. Imagine that. They're going after some other form of prey. They're just trying to survive. Also from Extreme Temps, extraordinary event, world climatic history rewritten, records brutalized with world record margins all over Asia. Parallel from an earlier headline. Insane records in Mongolia, locally broken by 8C. That's 15 degrees. When you're breaking records by 15 degrees, you know something is radically wrong. From OregonLive.com, Portland's record-breaking warm winter isn't cooling down yet. We have extreme temps again.com. Expect lots of snow melting, including at high elevations between British Columbia and Alberta. Montana, they say melting snow as high as 3,000 meters, almost 10,000 feet. But hey, it's snowing in Florida, or it's going to, right? Raining 10,000 feet up in British Columbia and snowing in Florida. Yeah, that makes so much sense. On that note, another from AccuWeather, Florida to have freezing weather this week as temperatures tumble across southeast. Temperatures may be 20 degrees below historical average. And the southeast with a frost or freeze likely in areas of Florida. Another one, Florida's cold snap can cause iguanas to fall from trees. Mentioned that earlier. What about the wider horizon? About the cryosphere, aka the planet's ice deposits? Yet again, the admission that the meltdown is far worse than we've been told, being further fueled by climate engineering operations, which create short-term toxic cooldowns at the cost of an even worsened overall planetary meltdown. With that in mind, from phys.org, atmospheric physicists find error in widely cited Arctic snow cover observations. They say climate scientists have long questioned the reliability of NOAA data, noting that the snow cover trends suggested by the data were dramatically inconsistent with other observations and argue that they should be treated with caution. In other words, they're hiding the totality of meltdown. Collaborators have validated these concerns through comprehensive new analysis. Snow cover actually decreased by 500,000 square miles per decade. Much worse than we've been told. That's the case across the board, and they're only telling the truth now because they can't hide it any longer. For the record, the North Pacific surface warmed over twice as fast over the past 15 years than it did over the preceding 156 years. That's an increase in warming rate of 2,000%. Houston, we have a problem. You think? Let me double back to this headline on the deluge part of the geoengineering equation. It's a headline I missed earlier. It needs to be stated from Reuters. 6 dead as Gaza's displaced struggle to hold ground in torrential rain. In Gaza, winter weather is adding to the suffering of families already pushed to the brink by over 2 years of war. And yet a stone throw away, in Iran, there is no water. Drought deluge scenarios both work well for the power structures to oppress whomever they wish. And for Americans that believe the manipulators of the Matrix aren't doing exactly the same to them, think again. So are our elected officials doing anything to slow down the dying of the planet or going full speed ahead in the opposite direction? From the New York Times, under Trump, U.S. adds fuel to a heating planet. The president's embrace of carbon fuels and withdrawal from the global fight against climate change will make it hard to keep warming at safe levels, scientists said. You can't trust anything these scientists say, for one thing, because they won't admit to climate engineering, and that's exactly what's going on with this administration more than any other. Disconnecting from any facade, and it is facades, pretending they're going to change business as usual and reduce carbon. They're not going to. But this is a rogue push to become the planet's biggest climate engineering participant. Final excerpt from the report just mentioned, quote, the administration seems hell-bent on blowing past ever more dangerous thresholds. We're already through the guardrail. Next stop, bottom of the canyon. So how many months in a row of above normal global temperatures have we had? I think we're approaching 600, something like that. Every single month above historical norms, and that's a falsified historical norm that actually hides some of the warming that already occurred. They draw the baseline across a graph that's already going up. So they cut off half the warming that's occurring, which hides some of the overall warming statistically. What else has been hiding so much of the heat that's been generated from industrialized, militarized everything with climate engineering at the top of the list, which all of it is a heat engine ultimately? The oceans. The oceans have been absorbing a massive amount of the thermal energy buildup on the planet, but no more. They're superheating, they're overheating, and that's now going to be released back into the atmosphere. From the UK Guardian, profound impacts. Record ocean heat is intensifying climate disasters, data shows. Again, climate engineering inseparable from all that, but it's an all-the-above equation. From Scientific American, ocean temperatures just hit a dire new record. World's oceans absorbed more heat in 2025 than any other year on record. From theconversation.com, as the Arctic warms up, race to control the region is growing even hotter. The U.S. president wants Greenland and expects to get it. Or, more correctly, the string pullers from the shadows. They are the true controllers. Is it even remotely reasonable to believe that the money-printing criminal cabal and their comic book character minions on both sides of the orchestrated political divide care at all for environmental anything? For the fish, the forests, the animals, the birds, the air you breathe, the water you drink, or the food you consume? Does anyone that's even slightly awake actually believe that these moralist monsters have any regard for the consequences of their actions? Not just impacted populations, but the entire dying by the day web of life? Look up. You'll have your answer. Chaos and carnage is coming on so many levels. It's completely out of control. Is martial law next? Definition, posse comitatus, restricts the U.S. military from acting as a civilian police force unless authorized by Congress, not the president. The official narrative on the Minnesota incident is every bit as mind-numbingly ludicrous as the official narrative about what happened on 9/11, 2001. How do far too many react when encouraged to objectively investigate facts and information that challenges preconceived or programmed conclusions that are a form of psychological defense, of existential threat denial? Deep-seated fear, often manifesting as anxiety, can trigger immoral behavior by disrupting rational thought, increasing self-focus, heightening threat perception, and interfering with ethical decision-making, pushing individuals towards self-protective or impulsive actions rather than moral reasoning, which can most definitely lead to rationalizing unethical choices as being acceptable. Fear triggers primitive fight or flight responses, reducing cognitive capacity for complex moral considerations. From thoughtco.com, the Milgram experiment. How far will you go to obey an order? ? From this report. Quote, understanding the infamous study and its conclusions about human nature, the Milgram experiment showed that people follow instructions even to harm others if told to do so by someone they perceive as an authority figure. What a sad testimony to the state of the human race. It's truly mind-bending that so many are so inclined to toe the line and the narrative of the behind-the-curtain predator, fascist, and control in so many ways because they're desperate to be considered a member of the big club, or at least of those that are actively or passively serving them, which far too many falsely believe will save them from what's already unfolding. Global ecological and climate collapse is the bottom line. From climate engineering to nuclear everything to industrialized, militarized so-called civilization, the storm is upon us. And again, as I must always make mention of, the big club, the criminal cabal masquerading as our government, includes many members from both sides of the controller-orchestrated political divide. Proof. After so many years and numerous presidents from both political parties, what percentage of the Epstein files has been released to date? Less than 1%. Ponder that. Now, how about the JFK assassination, which, like the Kirk assassination and so many others, was anything but what the public was told? Have the JFK files ever been fully disclosed by any administration of any political stripe? No. But the ranks of the coward conformists for fascist tyranny are rapidly becoming the publicly scorned minority. In the words of Edmund Burke, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. Sadly, even at this late hour, with the human race and the entire web of life circling the drain, literally, far too many continue to actively or passively support the inmates that continue to run the orbiting asylum. But for those that have summoned the courage to take the road less traveled, the narrow road, never underestimate the difference you can make even at this late hour. Please choose to make a difference. It's now or never. As I stated to the world in the final moments of the climate engineering documentary, The Dimming, any one of us could be the final pebble to trigger the landslide of awakening. And regardless of how this story ends, the effort matters in and of itself in ways that we can't yet know or fully understand, but it matters. If by our collective efforts we can reach a critical mass of awareness, a critical mass of compassion that goes far beyond our personal paradigms, who can say what may yet be possible? Never give up, ever. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please make your voice heard, make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.